right, welcome everyone to this week's edition of Redistricting Radar. Unfortunately, Harrison was unable to make it this week, but he'll be back for next week, of course, as we go over different states. So this week we're going over the state of Arkansas, which is actually a fairly interesting state politically. Even though politically it's a very Republican state, it actually has a lot of traits and history that make it a kind of an interesting state to go over. So I don't know if you want to say anything about Arkansas, Adam.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, really. Maybe we should jump right into it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the key principles in Arkansas, historically, they had a fairly basic standard for what the map should look like. They avoided county splits when possible. It's kind of written into their constitution to some degree, although the actual degree to which is done is really not quite certain. There's some kind of vagueness there, and the last redistricting cycle kind of blew up the county split standard entirely. So for the foreseeable future, it kind of depends on what you think either party's going to go for, but we're going to go ahead and show you some of what we're talking about here. So the basic rules of Arkansas, accordingly, are basically the same as you would expect in any other southern state. The legislature passes the map, and the governor can veto it. Obviously, if the legislature would have to override the veto, but typically, obviously, Arkansas is a historically Democratic-leaning state. It's generally known for having a Democratic ancestry, and up until recently was actually controlled by Democrats. In the 2010 redistricting cycle, Democrats controlled the legislature and drew a map that was pretty favorable to Democratic interest overall. They aimed to preserve a 3-to-1 congressional majority, but ultimately all that was able to achieve long term was a dummymander, or what we would call dummymander, which is typically a map that that was drawn to favor one party, but in the end favor the other party. So I'll go ahead and pull up the congressional district history here just to give you an idea of what we're talking about with Arkansas before we go into showing you the congressional districts. So as you can see right here, this is the original Arkansas congressional maps, and they look pretty similar to, not the original, but this is the oldest ones that are shown. And you can see they stayed pretty similar. This is the 70s and early 80s, 80s and early 90s, 90s and early 2000s, and then up until 2013. You'll notice these maps are fairly compact, not a lot of county splits, if at all. They're fairly geographically consistent. You have a district rooted out in the western portion of the state. You have one rooted in the southern. You have one in the eastern portion of the state, and you have one in the center of the state. For a state like Arkansas, this actually makes a whole lot of sense for a congressional district map. But 2013 is where things really blew up. Specifically, the third congressional district was kind of butchered. It goes along some unusual lines and was drawn mainly to protect the incumbent in the 4th congressional district at that point. So to show you what it looks like with the county splits right here, you'll notice there's a ton of counties that are split here, more than you would expect just from looking at it. So obviously Newton County split, Crawford County, and Sebastian. Those are 2 counties that are more urban than a lot of counties in Arkansas. The rest of the map is fairly consistent to some degree, but that's just looking at it right there. So what are your thoughts on kind of the, Adam, on this map and its ultimate effects? Because it proves to be kind of a disaster for Arkansas Democrats.
Right. So what this map is really trying to do is Democrats have 3-1 majority forever. 2010 rolls around, and you have a combination of retirements. The Democrats lose the 1st and 2nd districts. Marion Barry and the other person, I forget which ones they mapped to district-wise. One of them retires, the other one loses. And suddenly you have a 3-1 Republican delegation. Republicans have always held the 3rd district, going back decades now. And 4th district, Mike Ross, popular Democrat, holds on by 15 points because the Republicans don't really contest his district. So the 4th district is basically designed to be as favorable to Mike Ross as possible. And 1st and 2nd districts are still designed to elect a Democrat because the Democrats figure, we'll come back in 2012, and 2010 was just a blip. So of course 2010 isn't a blip, and the Democrats could have drawn themselves one safe seat, but what they end up doing is with 1 and 2, they screw themselves out of that seat. And additionally, Mike Ross, after getting his ideal seat draws from, goes, "Guess I'll retire," and to
run for governor in 2014. So literally the term after this map takes effect.
Yes. And that's how you get, I believe it was Tom Cotton in the 4th District in 2012. Oh, so really this map from the day it was incepted has done nothing but backfire for Democrats. So you just have to think about it. They blow up the traditional redistricting principles. Well, they draw the most ideal districts possible, seemingly, then backfires terribly losing. It's like that Gru toilet meme. Just like
yeah, that's really what it is. I mean, they really screwed the pooch here. I mean, it just goes without saying this just was not a very well thought out map. And especially if you even look at Arkansas, how it voted in 2008 on the presidential election, it was just the idea they were going to keep 3 seats forever in Arkansas. When you look at what Arkansas was like back then, you look at what it looks like then, it looks like this. It's frankly a ludicrous proposition, the map they drew. I mean, they really could have drawn 1 safe seat in the central area of the state, taking in some of those areas in the along the Mississippi River Delta, taking in Little Rock, taking in Pine Bluff. But they chose instead to split up these areas to make the 2nd district be way too favorable to Republicans. And the result was just kind of a disaster of a map. And then even as the state became redder, obviously a lot of these areas you see a little bit of a swing then. And then 2016 is just a complete decimation in a lot of these areas because Arkansas doesn't have the population to support a stable VRA district. It's theoretically possible to draw a district that is majority African American, but it's not practical. It's not legal. And really the best you could do is one where you could maybe in theory hope that a Democrat of color could win a primary. But really barring that, they just didn't have a whole lot of hope here. And so they tried to protect their 3 white Democrats they had elected, and it completely backfired. So this map right now, pretty favorable for Republicans overall. If you look at the Cook PVI ratings for the districts, obviously 3 of them are overwhelmingly Republican. The 3rd district is the most Republican at 19 percentage points, although it has some areas that trended a little bit Democratic relative to the state. This is just the most extraordinarily Republican portion. The northwestern corner has really been the historic base of the Republican Party in Arkansas. The 1st and the 4th are equally Republican at R plus 17. These districts would have voted for Mitt Romney, they would have voted for Mitt Romney by around 25 percentage points, which is a really strong margin, obviously, in a state that's pretty Democratic. And then the 2nd is Republican plus 7. It voted for Mitt Romney by 12 and voted for Donald Trump by 10. So it trended a little bit more Democratic than the rest of the state. And in fact, our friend Noah Rudnick has posted articles about the possibility of this being a swing district in 2020. And this was convincing enough for us to move the 2nd district to leans Republican. It's actually in the same ballpark of districts that you would expect to be flippable because of that Republican plus 10 margin for Trump. But overall, right now, Republicans have control of the legislature by an overwhelming margin, and they control the governor's office. Mike Ross lost his campaign in the landslide in 2014 to run for governor, and the current governor, Asa Hutchinson, is extraordinarily conservative and would have no problem passing any map that the legislature proposes. Historically, it's been supposed that districts should not split congressional or should not split counties. I think to some degree, both of us have disregarded this a little bit because we do have county splits, although ours are still relatively minimal, even mine is compared to the rest of the state. So do you want to just go ahead and show what we've got so far? Or
yeah, sure. I think we should just jump right into it with those maps and just let people see. Sorry, and see our guess of what could be going on in 2 years.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and go first, since I think Adam's going to be able to explain his a lot more than I will. Mine is a pretty straightforward map. It's designed to preserve a 4-0 Republican majority forever, and it would do so quite successfully. So what are the changes with this map? So right away, you'll notice the 3rd remains fairly similar. It stretches through those areas. This is primarily to prevent it from being too Republican. My goal here is to create 4 districts that were relatively even in competitiveness and in partisanship, so that none of the representatives would feel that they had gotten the short end of the stick. At the same time, the representatives generally maintained they all live in their congressional districts, and they maintain the majority of the area and population of their congressional districts. So let's start with the first one. And I'll go ahead and just only have this one on. This is pure Mississippi River Delta area. If you notice along here, a lot of the stretches along the borders with Tennessee and Mississippi. It contains some of the most African-American portions of the state. Specifically, if you look at the black population here, you'll notice it's kind of concentrated in this area along from Memphis down, and it contains all of those. It also contains most of the white areas around it. The largest Democratic-leaning area in this district is Pine Bluff. Pine Bluff is in Jefferson County, and it's a very Democratic county. It's actually the most Democratic county in the state if you look at it vote-wise. But that's not enough to make this district competitive. This would have voted for Donald Trump 61-34. Very safely Republican district. Even in 2008, Republicans would have won it by over 12 percentage point, or by 12 percentage points around. So a really good district for Republicans, and the incumbent representative in the second congressional or the first congressional district, Rick Crawford, should have no issue winning here for the foreseeable future. It also helps that his the land area of the district is pretty consistent with what it is at the moment. The second is where we see a lot of change. So part of the problem with this one is that French Hill lives in Little Rock. He lives in the city of Little Rock, which is itself in a Democratic county, Pulaski County. So obviously the county has to be split. And so how did I split it? Well, I just took out Little Rock and I put it in 2, and then everything else goes in the other congressional districts. So this district would be overwhelmingly Republican still. It stretches up into some of the Ozark areas, goes into some of those areas of the Republican strength in the Northeast to really emphasize the advantage here. Would have voted for Donald Trump by around 16 percentage points. If you look at previous elections, it would have given Republicans strong majorities as well. 2008 would not have been remotely competitive. It would have actually been a stronger district for Republicans than the first. So French Hill would have no problem getting reelected in this district. So what about the third? So the third district, oops, sorry, kind of went along there. It's actually pretty similar to the current district. So if you look at the current third district right now, you'll notice it kind of stretches along through places like Fort Smith up into Rogers, which are some of the areas. Fayetteville, if you're familiar with Walmart, that's where the Walmart company is based out of, and into some of these rural counties along here that are very strongly Republican. The current district doesn't change too much. Steve Womack would have a very easy time winning this district, and it would have been extraordinarily Republican. In 2008, it would have voted for John McCain by around 29 percentage points, and it would have voted for Donald Trump by around 30. So a really strong advantage in the district for Republicans. Finally, the fourth is it changes a little bit. The incumbent Republican in the fourth, Bruce Westerman, if you'll notice here, the district kind of looks very similar, stretches up into some of the Ozarks, except that kind of gets chopped out here. So in exchange for those Ozark areas that go into the second district, the fourth takes in areas of Little Rock and some adjacent suburban areas. Rick Weatherford lives in Hot Springs, and this district is almost entirely the same beyond losing that portion of the Ozarks. So he would have no issue winning this district, but it is worth noting this does become marginally more Democratic than before. This is a district that John McCain would have won by 20 percentage points, and that Donald Trump would have won by around 25. So all of these districts would be overwhelming advantages for Republicans. And Republicans would be generally happy with this, I think, because all of the candidates would be roughly around where the state is. So statistically, just to show you what this looks like, Donald Trump won the state by around 30 percentage points. And you'll notice 3 of these districts are a little bit below the statewide percentage. This is because the third is by default somewhat of a Republican vote sink. The way I drew it kind of minimizes that. So you notice it voted for him with 66%, whereas the other ones voted for him with around 64 or 63%. But still very strongly Republican districts. The analytics, Dave's redistricting is not happy at all with this map. Ticket splitting, compactness, and proportionality are kind of okay, but you'll notice it has a 0 for minority rights and a 0 for competitiveness. Unlike most southern states, Arkansas does not have the population, as I mentioned earlier, to sustain a Voting Rights Act district. So this means Republicans can draw whatever map they want to their heart's content, basically. One other thing to note, if you'll notice the county splits I did here, is there are 5 county splits in this map. So it splits this county right here, splits along here. There's one or two precincts here for population that are split. And then, of course, these 2 counties right here are also split. So that's a total of 5 county splits on this map, which is it's not horrible by most standards. I think most maps would consider having roughly the same number of splits as the total number of districts to be pretty fair. But obviously, this map is not remotely fair. Overall, a strong Republican map that would elect Republicans with no issue at all, and there would not be any chance of a blue dog or of a moderate suburban candidate being able to win in any of these districts. The only risk would be of a primary for some of these people for being insufficiently conservative, but I don't really see that as being a potential problem given the high, just the nature of the Arkansas Republican Party. So, what are your thoughts on the? Yeah, what are your thoughts on the map, Adam?
I think it's an all-around solid map, as you mentioned, and they're all in terms of the traditional redistricting principles, it goes along to a sufficient degree. With that, in terms of protecting the incumbents against challenges, it does that. In terms of maintaining the existing geographic integrity, obviously French Hill's representing a fairly different district than it used to, but you shouldn't have any issue holding that. It would probably find the new district preferable than being on the edge of competitive in blue waves. And in terms of sustaining challenges, Bruce Westerman certainly draws a little bit more from like your moderate think tanks and your average Republican from Arkansas, but none of them would have any real issue sustaining challenges in that, and they seem persistently Republican forever. You also noted on Arkansas 3, it's very underrated because of how red that district is currently, but it actually trended quite a bit blue from 2012 to 2016, just because it's surprisingly urban, with Fort Smith, Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, or, major municipalities like that.
Yeah. And one thing worth noting is that the portion of the 3rd that stretches into the Ozarks is pretty sparsely populated. If I recall right at my map, it's less than 200,000 people in districts that are, making up a population of around 747,000. So in terms of population, it's very much still centered around the Little Rock area. Those rural areas are just mostly drawn in for vote balancing. Obviously, the largest city in one of those counties, for example, Sebastian County, the largest city in that county is entirely in the 3rd congressional district. That's just something to keep a mention of. I saw someone mention in the comments that the district got eliminated here, French Hills, but no, it did not. It's just a different district draw to make it a little bit more favorable for him. I could have easily done the same thing and just cut off those portions of Little Rock and the suburban county right above it and gotten basically the same result, just a marginally more Democratic. This is basically just designed to be a Republican gerrymander that I think is viable, that I think they might try. But I think Adam went to a little bit of a different approach. It's pretty unique in his map.
Right. So my map and Eric, if you just pull it up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you sent it to me. Sorry, my bad.
Okay. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I forgot you had sent. I forgot that's the reason you sent it to me. Because I forget I'm the only one who can share screens on here. Yep. So he went with a different approach on his map, and I think it's basically the same sort of principle, but he carried the traditionalness of the map a little bit further into a map that's more in line with what Arkansas has traditionally done, in theory. But in practice, it's an equally egregious map overall, as mine is.
So if you look at this map for a second, you'll know the first thing you can notice that it only splits one county, which is Pulaski County. And what this does is that it splits Pulaski County around the bank of the Arkansas River. So what you're saying is that when you can make this case, if you're the Arkansas GOP, you can say we went from the current map, which splits about a dozen counties, to a restoration of our traditional redistricting principles in large part. And the one place where we don't do that, which is Pulaski County, we're splitting against an obvious and natural geographic figure.
Mm-hmm. Rivers are something the GOP loves to draw along.
Right. And then if you look at it, despite the fact that it only splits one county, you still have reasonably sufficient population equality. You're not going to draw a lawsuit, even if you approve this. And then if you look at how this really shifts, it's fairly similar. The 3rd district becomes much more compact, and it's much more akin to the 3rd district that existed from 2003 to 2013, which was also represented by Steve Womack and earlier John Bozeman. And that really very safely Republican district. You can see there, it's much more in line with your traditional layout than how the Democrats drew in 2010. If you then move to the first congressional district, that again, very similar. This one preserves more of the 2013 shape than a restoration of the earlier shape, but it still works out very well for its incumbent. Rick Crawford, keeps the same essential shape, keeps that majority of the counties the same. His home in Jonesboro, no issues with that. Then if you go to the fourth, just want to go around the state in order. This is more or less the same shape. You again lose that Ozarks portion, which was a little bit in the district in the 2003 to 2013 map, not really in an earlier maps, much more in the post-2013 map. So it's kind of again, restoration of earlier designs to an extent. And then you gain that North Little Rock area, which makes the district marginally more competitive. You can see Trump only won it by 18 points. And as compared to the current map, which, if I can just pull that up quickly, the current map, which gave him a 33-point victory. But again, Rick Crawford would have no issue holding it. The district is massively inelastic. So it's not like an 18 where, right Democrat, right Republican, something could happen. It's very inelastic as a district. And despite its, tradition as a yellow dog Democratic district that, always elected Democrats, like David Pryor in the 70s and then Mike Ross earlier. And then the second district, which is French Hills, this one sees the most change. So it keeps a lot of the rural counties that are French Hills. I don't believe there's any portion of the district outside of Pulaski County that was removed from the district. And it grows to absorb those Ozark areas that were in the fourth district. It also doesn't split any municipalities as a result, which again, preservation of traditional geographic features, very appealing to Arkansas. And this is a similarly state. This preserves him in a district that Trump won by, you have that up there, 21 points. So it's a map of least change, in visual appearance and in geographic things, but it has great effect in terms of taking districts off the map and really preserving those Republican incumbents in districts that appear similar to the current ones.
Definitely. One thing I wanted to comment on that I found interesting was your inclusion of Pine Bluff, Jefferson County, into the 4th Congressional District. Obviously, the way you drew it necessitates that, because there's no way to draw the way you drew along the river. There's no way for you to do that without putting Pine Bluff in there. But that does make the 4th a little bit more Democratic than it normally would be. Obviously, it's not a huge deal, and it probably shouldn't be a problem, but it is interesting to note given there is a portion of Little Rock in there. Although the portion isn't overwhelmingly Democratic if you look at it. It's the southern parts are, if you kind of look the way it's split, but there's obviously a lot of red in this northern portion as well. So it's not like it's not an overwhelmingly Democratic portion of Pulaski.
Right. So the reason why I moved to Pine Bluff, and I did consider multiple iterations of this map, including ones where I did not move Pine Bluff, is it appeared to make more sense to put Pine Bluff in the 4th district from a partisan perspective for Republicans than it did to keep it in the 1st district, as it it's still in the 4th district. Actually, it was always in the 4th district.
Yeah, but I moved it into the 1st mainly just because of that parity reason, to keep them all even. But obviously, that does change a little bit of the partisan vote overall.
Right. It does move the district about 10 points to the left of where it currently is in terms of PVI, but it still keeps it a safely Republican district. And really the map achieved its primary objective, which is preserving French Hill and making it seem totally uncompetitive without jeopardizing other Republicans. Yeah.
Obviously, this would be so much easier for Republicans if French Hill did not live in Little Rock. But given he does, they have to work around that. And it's not basically, if you were to draw the perfect Democratic district, it wouldn't be overwhelmingly so. It would be maybe 2 to 5 points to the left of the country. Certainly a district a Republican could win in a very good red wave year. Not entirely out of the picture entirely, but so what we're talking about here is even if you drew the ideal district, you put in Pulaski, you put in Jefferson, you put in all of the Delta counties, Democrats would still not be perfectly set. That's just how red Arkansas is at this point and how geographically sparse their coalition derives from at this point.
Right. I remember this quite well. After there was that outlier poll that showed Arkansas quite close, some months ago, people who freaking out, oh, competitive Arkansas, even though total outlier joke poll. Oh, Drew Savicki went on Twitter and said, guys, Arkansas is Alabama if you Thanos snapped half the black voters in the state.
That's basically what it is.
Yeah.
It's more like Oklahoma in terms of its population than it is in terms of any other deep South state in terms of there's not a lot of black voters here. There never have been. It's always been dominated by white Democrats. Even to just because there's not been that many, they've all been based around that Mississippi Delta area, around Memphis, around Little Rock and Pine Bluff, but not anywhere else. I mean, some of the areas in the third are extraordinarily white. I mean, if you look at the third district's population overall, I would be surprised if the black population, made up more than 10%. I mean, it's 3% of the population there. That's Midwestern numbers right there. I mean, the Hispanic population there is larger than the black population in terms of voter adjusted population. If you look at total population, I wouldn't imagine it's too much better. It's 3.8%. There's almost as many Asian people and Native Americans in the third district as there are black residents. It's hard to find that population there. And an ideal district would have about 35 to 40%, and that would be basically packing every single black voter you can find within reason into it. Now, obviously, Democrats still would like to have a better maps from Arizona, and there was an attempt to put a amendment on the ballot initiative on referendum to create a nonpartisan redistricting commission. But the Supreme Court struck it down. The Arkansas Supreme Court rejected including it on the ballot this time because there was a new law requiring basically the people who were proposing the initiative, the canvassers, to pass background checks. It's a very tenuous reason, and it's a kind of a frivolous law. But the impact was ultimately that there will not be, at least for when the maps were drawn this time, a nonpartisan commission drawing them. The legislature that's elected this time around, or the election, will be the one that draws the maps ultimately. And it's going to be a very Republican one. You're going to get a very Republican map.
Right.
Yeah, so we still got a lot of time here. I don't know if you want to do anything else about Arkansas, or maybe if you want to finally do that belated Arizona map while we're both here. There's a special addendum because Harrison's not here, so
we can schedule that for a different time. It's definitely something I do want to do since we do have quite our disagreements on Arizona. I think we could probably find some things to find common ground there. But if I could put together in DRA quickly, I could probably figure out what a Democratic district they might want to hope for in Arkansas would look like.
Yeah, I mean, it would basically just stretch along from Little Rock into Pine Bluff, and then I actually may have drawn one at some point when I drew a fair map of Arkansas. Let me see if I can, because I drew fair maps of every state. Here we go. I found it right here.
Right.
Yep. So, I made two of them. I think this is the fair map. Yeah, this is the fair map. So I'm going to go ahead and show it here. We normally don't show a potential fair map, but we figure this time, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So this is the ideal Democratic fair map of Arkansas. The 4th district here, you'll look at it. This is by 2010 numbers. So this isn't looking at this cycle. This is looking at 2010, although the results will be fairly similar this time. This 4th is basically the best case scenario for Democrats. I mean, you could make it a little bit. I mean, you notice basically all of the minority areas that you basically can stretch in there within reason are included here. And this would have voted for Hillary Clinton by around 7 percentage points. And it would have voted for Barack Obama by around that same margin as well. So relatively inelastic district. If you look at the attorney general and governor races, Republicans would have actually won the district in the 2018 gubernatorial race. So again, this is 65% of the vote statewide. That's when you start flipping this district. And in terms of population, you see right here, it's only 35% black. There's really not much more you can do with it, even with Pine Bluff and with, if you just take Pine Bluff and Pulaski out, you get a district that's these two Democratic areas, 57% of the vote goes to the Democrats, but the district's only 36% black. That just gives you an idea of just how wide of a state Arkansas is and how the challenge of drawing a map, because there's really not a whole lot of Democrats left here, for being honest, outside of those two counties.
Right. And if you give me a second, I'm working on one now. But I mean, really, if you do, and I tried to prioritize counties quickly, the best you can do is, maybe a district Hillary won by a 9 that's 38% CVAP black. I mean, that's just not impressive, and it doesn't. Sorry,
and it wouldn't be a fair map. It would be a gerrymander to a degree. To some degree, there's a geographic problem you have. The fairest version of a district would probably not even stretch the delta. It would probably just encompass Pine Bluff and Pulaski and some of the suburban areas, and would be pretty politically competitive.
Right.
And Jackson, I would say we've not eliminated Armand forever. He will be back at some point in the future. We just obviously decided to let things boil over and go the way they are. But next week is going to be our big one. We've got California, and I believe he will be back for that one. I've already got my California map ready. I've got a spreadsheet. I don't want to kind of show you my spreadsheet. It's a spoiler, but I've got all the numbers there. It's an interesting map. I tried to be very charitable to the commission and their goals. But you'll see it next week. It's going to be a lengthy episode, and it's going to be a deep dive really into one of the states that's going to be the most challenging to draw, because there's a lot of different competing communities of interest in California. I mean, if you look at the Senate districts, even the ones the commission drew, they look weird, and there's reasons they look weird, but they don't necessarily have to if you draw them a certain way. It's just a really interesting state to redraw, and it helps that you can now renumber districts, so I don't feel like I need to abandon the state halfway through because the numbering scheme is completely ruined.
Yeah. So, here if I can share my screen and quickly. So I could share this. You all can see it. I'm sharing in this tab here on DRA. Eric, you can see that?
I can see it. Yep, we can see it.
So what this map here does, and this map doesn't split any counties at all, actually, is probably the best map you could ask for if you're the Democrats. And what this map does in practice is it packs every Democrat in the state into two. And even then, you still have a map that is a district that is majority white. You have a district that Hillary only won by 9 points. Won the Senate candidate Connor Eldridge in 2016, only won by 8. It's one that Obama only won by 8. Won your Attorney General candidate in 2018, won by 7. It's one that Asa Hutchinson still won by 4 points. And
So not a safe district even. I mean, it's inelastic roughly, but like the idea you could really draw a VRA district that's safe Democratic here is just not really viable. It's not like in Georgia or North Carolina even where it's a struggle to draw them in some areas, but you can do it. Here, it's not even a struggle. It's just you literally can't. Without literally drawing a gerrymander like you would in the 90s, trying to connect every black voter in the state into a district, which obviously is not fair, and it's not required under the VRA.
North Carolina's 1992 to 1998 map has entered the room.
Ludicrous.
I know how much you love that map.
Yeah, that was the map.
I know. Oh, Eric, I know you have a great love in your heart for James Baxter Hunt Jr. and everything that came in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, he's my favorite governor. In fact, just like I can't get enough of him.
Yes, but anyhow, what you can really see is just Arkansas is just a state in which, even under the most ideal situations, Democrats would struggle to have a consistently blue district, and this is far from ideal situations for Democrats.
Yeah,
and it seems like after years of passing maps that have worked because of local blue dogs, and then passing a dummymander, they're finally out of luck. And
it's the fault of the old school Democratic style of a gerrymander, which was what I call the incumbent protection gerrymander. People assume that because a district on paper looks fair from a presidential level, that it's a fair district. You look at down ballot, there were reasons they drew the districts like that. Down ballot, they were still pretty solid in a lot of areas, and there were a lot of voters, even in places like the 3rd.
Eric, I think we lost you for a second. Can you?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Oops. I think Adam kind of froze up, but basically, I call them an incumbent protection gerrymander because it's drawn specifically for the reasons of the incumbent. The problem with these gerrymanders is that they simply don't work. They tend to break over the long term. And when they break catastrophically. And they result in the complete opposite of what you wanted, which in this case was a 3-1 Democratic map, turning into a 4-0 Republican map. It's really kind of a tale of not to overexert yourself when you're drawing your maps, because ultimately it can and will come back to bite you. Seems like we lost Adam here. Maybe he'll join back in a second. But overall, yeah, that's kind of Arkansas. It's a really simple state on paper, but in practice, like a lot of these states, there's a lot more diversity underneath the surface. And in this case, it's particularly interesting redistricting history overall. I think we just lost him. So with that, I think we'll close off this week's edition of Redistricting Radar. Be sure to tune in next week because we will be going over the big one, California. Gigantic episode. You're going to really like it. Again, you'll love what I've done, what Adam has done with his maps, and Armin and Harrison as well. There's going to be a lot to go over, and it will be a challenge to go over all that's going on in California. But I think we can handle it, and I think you'll definitely be able to appreciate sort of a deep dive into that state because there's just really a lot going on. I mean, I literally have a gigantic spreadsheet with every congressional district that I've drawn, marked down, the demographic numbers, the partisanship. I even assigned a rating, like a safe to safety to safe R. So I don't know if anyone else has done the same, but it's going to be a good episode. So be sure to tune in next week for next week's edition as well. Thanks for watching this one. As I hope you've seen so far that states like Alabama and Arkansas are actually way more interesting than you would think at first. So any final thoughts on Arkansas, Adam, before we wrap up?
I think we covered it really solidly. And, for those of you who are watching out there, be sure to tune into future episodes. We're always Wednesdays. It is at 7. We got a real exciting one oncoming for you next week.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on Redistricting Radar, 7 o'clock Eastern, same time, same place.